right, Nick, let's talk about the Los Angeles Rams. We've talked ad nauseum about how the Rams have made lots of smart moves over the past few years. And even this offseason, they've been doing some really great things as well. There's one move in particular that kind of caught people off guard, and that was the signing of quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. But when you look deeper into the issue, this may have been the smartest move that they have made yet, solely based on what they had to potentially pay for it. Let's get into the article and talk more about it on the other side. This is from NBC Sports. It says 4 days ago, reports emerged that quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo will sign with the Rams. Today, the Rams officially announced the move, and had his introductory press conference. There's been no disclosure of any kind as to what he'll make for the Rams. 6 years ago, Garoppolo was briefly the highest paid player in NFL history through a 5-year deal, which averaged $27.5 million per year. Now, whatever he's getting isn't worth his agent Don Yee leaking to anyone. The general rule of thumb is that if the numbers don't emerge within 24 hours, they're not worth writing home about. It has been 4 days for Garoppolo, so obviously the correlation is definitely not worth writing home about what he is getting paid by the Rams. It sounds like another steal. Nick, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one, but before we get there, in the comments below, Rams fans, let us know. It's been a very interesting offseason. We've talked about the Rams. I've asked you about the Rams. We've asked about all kinds of stuff. I want to know in the comments, this is a little bit different. What other team has signed a free agent that you thought was a really smart move? Let us know in the comment section below what other teams around the NFL have made a move that you thought was really smart. And let us know maybe why you think it was so smart in the comment section below. But Nick, what are your thoughts on this latest move by the Rams?
Yeah, so when it first broke that the Rams signed Jimmy G, I kind of dismissed it like a lot of people did, like, oh, Jimmy G's it has been. But then you kind of think for a second, like, this is a guy who started a lot of football games. This is a guy who started and won a lot of playoff games. This is a guy who was the starting quarterback in a Super Bowl. He is literally the most valuable backup quarterback option out of anybody by far this offseason. It's not even close. But he is such a beaten down asset, to use the investment terminology, because of how it ended with the Raiders, a couple injury concerns, and of course he's going to have a suspension with the PED violation to start the season. But in terms of a backup quarterback that you want to come in if you have an injury mid or late season and need to win a few games, or God forbid you have an injury in the postseason, he is the perfect guy. He's been there, he's done that. And the reality is he's had his best, most productive offensive years in the Kyle Shanahan 49er offense, which of course is very similar to the Sean McVay Rams offense in terms of schematically. So if he does have to come in and play for, again, God forbid, injured Matthew Stafford, he'll fit in just fine, and the offense won't be as good, but they'll be able to function at a high level. And I think that's what makes this move really smart by the Los Angeles Rams, because the Rams, even with Donald retiring, which obviously all-time great, they're still one of the more talented teams in the NFC. They've got Coach Wright. They've got a Hall of Fame MVP caliber quarterback. They've got stars in a lot of other positions as well. Got great talent in some key areas too. They're set up to make a serious run to the NFC title this year. I mean, that's people kind of sleep on them a little bit. Everyone's looking at San Francisco and Detroit, but the reality is Los Angeles is right there with those teams. The one thing that could derail them, and I think it hurt them last year, is of course injuries, and especially at the quarterback position, their backup situation wasn't nearly as good. Now we have a much better backup situation. So if Matthew Stafford, who of course is getting up there in age, misses a few games, you slide in Jimmy G, and you could easily win both those games, right? And Garoppolo's done that before. He famously took over for an injured Tom Brady a number of years ago in New England and went undefeated as a starter those handful of games he had to play. So this is something that Jimmy G is perfectly suited for, right? Everyone wanted Jimmy G to be the franchise guy. He never quite lived up to that. But the reality is he is the perfect backup quarterback in the NFL, and it looks like, based on this reports, the Rams essentially got him for what looks to be something close to the league minimum. This is an outstanding pickup by the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, Nick, I think this is a great move because you said it. He's familiar with this sort of offensive scheme. He's been around the league. He's been in learned 3 different offenses. When you look at the Patriots, you look at the Raiders, you look at the 49ers. He's well versed. That's something I like to see in a backup, as a guy who can go to many different systems and learn those systems to the fullest ability. Like you said, he's a backup who's been there in the biggest moments. You have a guy that can step in. Sometimes, like, you think a backup steps into a playoff game, kind of tough. I think of like the Dolphins a few years ago when Tua went down and I can't remember the quarterback's name who stepped in.
Skylar Thompson.
Skylar Thompson stepped in. And the moment was just like a little bit too big for him. That is something you don't get with Jimmy G. He's been there, he knows the moment, so he can come in a position like that. You have a guy that, he's not, I think this is a perfect situation for him because every other team he's been at, he's been threatening the other quarterbacks on the roster. When he was in New England, he wasn't really threatening anybody there. But after that, when he was on the 49ers, the whole Trey Lance, Jimmy G debacle, that kind of was really not great. Then, same thing with the Raiders, not great. But now with the Rams, he's not threatening Matt Stafford for a starting spot. There's no one who would ever dream of starting Jimmy G over Matt Stafford. So I think that's a good symbiotic relationship there. They can grow and learn from each other, and nobody is threatened by the other one's presence. And so I think all those things combined, this is a great move for the Rams, and seemingly they got him for pennies on the dollar. This is a guy that comes in low price, been around the league for a while, knows a lot of offenses, has all of the right intangibles to be good in those big moments. This is the guy that you want backing up your team. All credit in the world to Stetson Bennett. I'm sure that he could probably do a good job, but nothing like Jimmy G can. We know what Jimmy G can be, and having a known quantity as your backup is really something that's kind of invaluable.
I 100% agree. And the real point here of the story, even though it hasn't been leaked, is that it is pennies on the dollar. It's such a high value move from the Los Angeles Rams, and people get caught up. I'm always so amazed how in the media teams making moves and everyone gets caught up. Who's this team's new left guard? Who's their next defensive tackle? Did they hire a new or bring in a new strong side linebacker? Did they trade for a new free safety? Those are all important positions, obviously. But the reality is, backup quarterback, if you have an injury, and Matthew Stafford has an injury history, he's up there in age, is far, I would say almost infinitely more important than any of all those positions, right? You can have the most stacked roster in the National Football League. If you're terrible at quarterback, you're going to really, really struggle, right? That's just the reality of it. The Rams have a very good roster spread out across multiple positions across both sides of the football. Great head coach, great coaching staff. Everything looks good there. But despite all that, if Matthew Stafford went down and their backup situation stunk, they'd be done for those games. And we saw that, namely, I remember the Green Bay Packers game from last season. I think they had a good chance to beat the Packers in Lambeau if Stafford is healthy. He wasn't. Of course, they lost that game. I think that affected their seeding, obviously, and affected some of their momentum down the stretch. It forced them to kind of play a lot of desperation football, and they were worn out by the time they got to the lines. Again, if they had Jimmy G, do they play differently? Do they beat the Packers? I think there's a strong chance they do. Going forward, they now have that problem solved. This is one of those moves that, again, doesn't make the headlines, but these high value moves at key underrated positions can really, really come to fruition when things happen over the course of the regular season, which we all know they inevitably do. This is a great job by Les Snead and the Los Angeles Rams, once again making smart moves, putting their team the best chance to win and make deep playoff runs.